I'm continuing a scratch build of a modern industrial facility on Ron's Trains and Things right now. Hi, I'm Ron of Ron's Trains and Things, and if you'd like to see more model railroad tips, tools, and techniques, then be sure and subscribe down below and click that little bell icon so you can catch future videos. About 18 months ago, I started the process of scratch building a modern industrial facility for my layout at North Yard. Specifically, I am modeling Victory Blue, which is a facility that produces diesel exhaust fluid and is a subsidiary of the Victory Fuels Corporation. Now, this structure had originally been built as a feed processing facility that turned grain into feed for livestock, bagged it, and shipped it out. That facility was then purchased and transformed into this DEF processing facility. That means that it's a very interesting structure because while it's a large metal structure that seems very simple in itself, it also has this grain elevator attached to it, which seems a little odd for what the thing processes now, but actually kind of makes an interesting facility. Now, I say all that to say this. I started this project back then, I made 2 videos about it, and then it got set aside in favor of other things that I got busy with, and I'm just now getting back to it. But I am really interested and excited about getting this structure finished. So today I'm going to bring you part 3 of what's going to ultimately be a 4-part series on building this structure. We're going to go back to it. I'll show you where I left off. And today we're going to use some commercial parts and some small kits to add some details and also do some basic painting on it. And I'm pretty excited about where it's going to go from beginning to end today. And then in part 4, we'll come back and finish that up. Enough talk. Let's head on over to the workbench and see where we are and see what we can get done today. Be sure and check out Midwest Model Railroad. With some of the best prices and customer service in the business, they're your one-stop model railroad shop. MidwestModelRR.com. Link in the description. When we left the Victory Blue project, I had constructed the long warehouse structure and its 2 processing bins. I had cut out the walls and laid out the windows and doors for the grain elevator, but I was waiting for needed parts to arrive. You can see all of my progress to this point, as well as the prototype structure and some background research for this building in parts 1 and 2 of this series. I'll link them in an iCard at the end of the video. In the interim, I cut out the openings for the doors and windows on the grain elevator and assembled the walls and the roof. I filmed this process, but I have since improved the resolution of my videos, so this old video would be poor quality, and the files were ultimately lost in the process of upgrading computers, so we'll just pick up from there. Having assembled the warehouse and grain elevator into one structure, it was a bit flimsy, so I added some stability by securing it to a strip of 1/4 inch hardboard. I glued the structure to the hardboard from inside using 5-minute epoxy. Next, I added trim to the roof line of the warehouse using 30 thousandths by 80 thousandths strip styrene. I cemented them in place with MEK using my touch and flow applicator. This is one of my absolute favorite structure building tools. It literally revolutionized my scratch building and kit bashing. I'll put a link to the touch and flow applicator in my Amazon pick of the week in the description down below. I highly recommend it. For the chutes that carry product from the elevator to the processing bins, I used small straw-type coffee stirrers. Whenever I use one of these at a convenience store or such, I always stick the used one in my pocket as they make great piping for models. I cut them to the needed angles with scissors. Now, I have experimented with cementing these to styrene with solvent cement, but the stirrers just don't soften in the solvent the same way that the styrene does, so I used thick CA. I dipped the end of the stirrer in the CA and carefully put it into place. The lengths and placement of these chutes were not straight and consistent on the prototype, so I didn't worry about them being so on my model either. This may look like a mistake to the eyes of some, but I know that it's correct. Next, it was time to build the external elevator leg for the end of the structure. For this, I used 2 Rix Products grain elevators. Each kit yields an elevator leg up to 120 scale feet tall. I needed 140 feet, so I would be using part of the second kit. The leg comes in sections that are 30 feet tall. Since 5 sections would be 150 feet, I decided to build my elevator to that height and evaluate its height from there. I started by cutting out the pieces of the leg with my flush cutting sprue tweezers. These are the best tool I have found for cutting plastic parts from their sprues. They are available from Micromark, and I'll provide a link to them in the description as well. If you use my promo code RONSTRAINS, you'll save 10% on these and any other regularly priced items at micromark.com. I sanded all of the gates off of the parts to get a perfect fit. There is some flash at the top end of nearly all of the leg pieces. I carefully sanded this away as well. The instructions recognize that the gates that are inside of the leg pieces near the top may interfere with assembly. They recommended trimming or sanding down the assembly tab at the bottom of each section to remedy this problem. I found it better to use my hobby knife and carefully shave this gate off of each piece. This not only remedied the assembly problem, but also allowed for better cementing of the leg pieces together inside of each leg section. When 2 matching pieces were sanded and fitting perfectly, I cemented them together using MEK. I started on the top end using a fine microbrush to apply the cement to the inside of the section where I had just shaved away the injection gate. I made sure that the seams were aligned perfectly, then cemented the bottom of the section together from the outside along the assembly tab. This part will not show once the leg is assembled. I avoided using the cement on the seam where it would show, as the solvent will mar the surface of the model. Per the instructions, I cut off the assembly tab on the bottommost section of the leg. Next, I turned to the elevator head. I cut out the pieces of the conveyor housing and the grain head and sanded them smooth. This takes some time and care on the grain head as the piece is curved and oddly shaped and very small. I then cemented the 2 parts of the conveyor housing together, as well as the 2 parts of the grain head. I then sanded the entire edge of both parts smooth. When I was satisfied with the pieces, I cemented them together. This is a bit tricky as, again, they are oddly shaped and cannot be easily clamped. I assembled the leg, starting by first cementing the head onto the top of the uppermost section. I then added each successive section down the leg, cementing them on the assembly tab, pressing them firmly together, then adding a bit more cement around the outside seam. I then used my tabletop and a straight edge to make sure the leg was straight. I compared my assembled leg to the elevator house, and as I had first thought, it was just too tall, so I cut the bottom of the leg off at the first 10-foot rib. I tried to do this with my hobby knife, but the assembled leg was just too thick to make an easy cut. My razor saw, however, made quick work of it. I sanded the bottom of the leg smooth and level, and added a bit more cement to the inside to ensure a good bond at the bottom end. With the leg assembled, I turned to the personnel platforms, handrails, and ladders. I prepared 4 platforms with their accompanying handrails and ladders. I cut them very carefully from the sprue. Here's an important tip if you're new to kit building. When cutting out delicate parts, cut the sprue apart before trying to cut the parts away from the sprue. Any sprue nipper will put some pressure on the parts as it presses into the injection gate to shear the material in two. By cutting the sprue apart, you allow for some room for the part to expand with this pressure without forcing it to distort and possibly break. I carefully sanded these parts with a medium fine sanding stick. On the ladders, there are tiny mounting tabs on the back side. You don't want to sand these off as you're sanding the injection gates away. Sand the inside of the platform so that they fit over the leg, but not so much as to leave a gap. I assembled 3 of the handrails to 3 sides of the first platform. I used solvent cement, so I worked on a piece of paper so as not to accidentally glue the item to my cutting mat. Assembling these is a bit fiddly, as making the rails fit together perfectly can be a bit of a challenge. The first assembled platform fits on the leg at the head. Slide it on, leaving a gap for the ladder in the back. To complete this platform, you have to cut one of the small handrail sections down to fit in between the existing rails and the head on each side. When this was complete, I installed the first ladder section, leaving one rung above the platform level and cementing it in place. Repeat this process for each platform. A platform goes on every third section of the leg. The other platforms that are not at head height slide all the way onto the leg, with the fourth section of handrails applied after the platform is cemented in place. The ladder openings alternate between the front and the back of the leg. When I installed the fourth platform, I realized that I had not accounted for the platform on the head and actually needed 5 total platforms instead of 4, so I cut out and sanded down another set of parts and added the 5th platform. With the leg assembly complete, I turned to another rooftop feature. I purchased this Walters Medusa Cement Company kit specifically to rob it of parts for several different projects. In this case, I'm using its large dust collector on the roof of the elevator. I cut out the needed parts, sanded the injection gates smooth, and assembled the simple structure per the instructions. I used the intake piping from the kit, but attached it to a section of styrene rod to create a pipe descending through the roof into the main structure. Finally, it was time to install these parts onto the structure itself. The elevator housing had been primed, so I had to remove some of the primer to be able to use a solvent cement to cement these in place. I simply used a bit of the solvent to clean away the primer in the appropriate spots. I cemented the leg to the end of the structure at the personnel platforms, then cemented the 3 grain chutes between the head and the roof of the structure. The spots of bare plastic where the primer was removed will simply paint over later. In the same way, I cemented the dust collector to the roof at each leg and the intake pipe. These details really make the structure look like something of use in the real world. The prototype structure was originally white, so I painted everything so far with Tamiya white fine surface primer. I couldn't film painting as I did it outside and it was already dark. Here's an image of the freshly painted structure, and as you can see, my dusk to dawn light makes it look absolutely green. And here is the structure so far in its place on my layout on North Yard. There's still much to do on this model. I have to install the door and window castings, build the loading shed for the elevator, paint the foundation and the trim, and weather it. But those will be the subject of the final installment of this series, so be sure to watch for that. When it has been published, I'll include a link to it in an end screen at the end of this video. Well, I feel like this project is really beginning to come together. Getting that base coat of paint on it really began to make this project look like a prototypical facility. Of course, I still have a lot to do, and we'll be coming back and doing all of those other detail and weathering things in part 4. Look for that over the course of the next few weeks. Well, hey, if you enjoyed this video today, you're going to want to be sure to catch parts 1 and 2 where I started this project, and you can find them in a playlist in the corner of your screen right now. Also, check out the description down below where you're going to find a link to my Amazon page and my Amazon pick of the week, as well as tons of other great links and promo codes that I know you will benefit from and enjoy. Be sure and check those out. Well, if you'd like some more model railroad content right now, check out the links on your screen. And be sure and join me each Tuesday as I bring you even more great model railroad videos. And I look forward to seeing you then. Tin Lizzie?